SWAM just updated the SWAM Woodwinds to the version 3 as well, so now all their instruments will look the same, and it differs somewhat from the previous versions. And I'm going to go over in this video how they relate to perhaps the same parameters from before, but they are all in new places. I'm going to show you where to find the new settings, the old settings, but the new places for the old settings. And for those of you that don't know anything about these instruments, this is, I guess, a great way to be introduced to where to find settings most relevant to how to get the MIDI guitar setup to work with the SWAM instruments in general. I'm going to go over this only with the tenor sax in this case, but the settings are the same for almost all the instruments, at least for the relevant part that I'm discussing here. So this is what the tenor sax looks like nowadays. Of course, you have like the breath noise and the harmonic structure and key noise and stuff like that, overblow just behind me. Let me first go over the settings in the MIDI Guitar 2 setup. So I'm starting with the polyphonic tracking type. You can of course use a monophonic tracking type. These are monophonic instruments. They are playing one note at a time, so if you care to, if you use it and feel that feels better for you, use the monophonic. I'm using the polyphonic tracking since it works better for my arpeggiations or arpeggios as I'm playing. Noise gate I'm always using at 0, since I've read that it actually adds to the latency or makes latency issues at least somewhat worse. And for those that have worked with this, latency can be an issue. I will argue that it's really not. It's mostly in the playing style, but this is at least one of those small things you can do to make it work a little bit better if you know about it, and don't have a lot of background noise that you need to filter out or gate out. The bends I have enabled at band range 2, since I'm starting to make all my presets with one band range decided already. So never enable legato, since it messes with your bends, at least in this desktop version of the MIDI Guitar 2 software. That would be the MIDI Guitar 2.2.1 version. Aftertouch enabled. I never know if I'm going to use the aftertouch for the expression control demand that the SWAM instrument have, so I'll leave this on. It doesn't mess with anything else in my experience, so I have this on in the background all the time. Transposer I have on, and I'll move this up an octave since the tenor sax is actually moved down an octave in the SWAM instruments. I'm going to show you that later. For these MIDI velocity settings, I'm used to starting at 12 o'clock for all three of them. It's nothing special, but this is the way I start. I mean, the curve works as a MIDI compressor on the one hand and a MIDI expander on the other hand. So this is the this is the 0 position for that one. The tone is like a ski slope for if you wanna enhance the higher end of the tracking. If we say you have a weak response in the higher end of the part of the guitar, you use this one. If you want to enhance the lower end, you use this kind of curve. I'll start with this with a flat curve, and the same with the gain. I can start with this on 12 or somewhat perhaps over, depends on what your incoming gain is like. I don't really like it hitting the roof here. So somewhere, yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to go into the tenor sax now, but I'll be moving this so you can see the tracking going on in this little box here if you want to monitor it. Okay, so this is what the new SWAM saxophone looks like. Up here you have a little box indicating saying tenor sax, and that's this is the first preset of theirs. They have presets now, and these are pretty good to have as a starting point. They have different parameters activated in some, and they have also the new equalizer makes quite a big difference for some of the presets, and you're gonna hear that. So this is the first default tenor sax that you heard. Next one is the classical, I think. Yeah. This has this little stage character to it, and it's mild and nice to play. Then you have this jazz, but aren't all saxophones jazz? I think so. It's good, that one too. Then you have a rock. I'm not a fan of growl and flutter tongue and stuff like this, but I mean it has its merits as well, of course. But then you know where to find it. Growl you find here, and that's one of those things that makes up a big part of that sound. You also have some growl on this one, but more significant for this sound you can hear it in the end there, this is the breathy PPP. It's sort of a breathy quality to the starting out of the not that strong notes. It's pretty nice. And then you have the Trane, called Trane I would guess then. I wouldn't use the overblow there for all of this. I might actually engage the overblow with the breath or the bite part of my breath controller here. It's another good preset. It's another good place to start your initial experimentation, let's say. But to get to the place where you have a close connection between the guitar, your guitar as a MIDI controller, and via the MIDI Guitar 2 software and to this software, there are some things that you actually need to look at more in detail, and I'll go over these now. So I'll close this one and I'll start a completely new one, and you'll hear the differences in how it reacts. So here's the new, looks exactly the same, but you'll hear in the sounds that it's reacting kind of differently because I haven't done any of the settings I did in the previous one. First off, the most important part, expression controller not received. Please move your expression controller. You saw me using the breath controller, so I was thinking I was using the breath controller, but I haven't actually done the settings for that one. So I'm going into the MIDI part here. You have presets, you have a mapping table here. I'm going into presets to begin with, and you are instantly presented with these alternatives. And you have a breath controller default, and you have a lot of different presets. And for those that have seen any of my other videos, you know I'm using either the Seaboard default preset here or perhaps the breath controller default, and that depends a little bit on how I'm going to use it. For the Seaboard default preset, I have a bit of a connection between the initial attack that isn't as obvious for the breath controller. I'm going to start with the first preset, with the breath controller preset, so you can see what needs to be changed. The only thing I did now was to choose the breath controller preset. Let's see what happens. Okay, it doesn't react really that tight as I would like it to. So the first thing I would like to check out is the pitch. We have here enabled the bends on the MIDI Guitar 2 software, and I just took the band range 2 from the list of possibilities here. Let's see what the SWAM instrument is at. So for some reason they have pitch bend up 2, which would match this one, but pitch bend down 3, which is not a match, and I would like to match the golden standard is to always match the pitch bends in the instruments between the MIDI Guitar 2 software and the instrument you're going to play. So now this is matched, and here you see what I talked about earlier. This instrument is actually transposed down 12 semitones or an octave. So this is why I need to use the transposer here on the MIDI Guitar 2 software to move it up. I could do it here, but then I have to do it for every preset I'm working through. So this is more of a general solution to that problem. Let's go back to where we were. Okay, great. Now we have pitch bend working, and it works exactly as I would expect it to work, considering I'm playing guitar and I want the pitch bends to match my pitch bends on my guitar, and it does. But I know from experience that this would be a problem. Okay, so this sounds awful. What was that? if you look down here where I play, you see that it says somewhere in the middle of all the messages, it says legato portamento. So we can actually draw a conclusion to that it has to do with the portamento settings. This is the second most important setting to work with from the MIDI Guitar 2 perspective. We have the pitch one that is okay, we have the expression one that is the first priority. You need to address the expression setting first, and then you have the pitch setting, and then let's go to advanced tab and go into MIDI. Here we have different settings for, let's go over this straight away. We have a MIDI profile, MPE instruments or legacy. In this case, this is MIDI Guitar 2, so it's not MPE yet. So we go with legacy, receive MIDI channel, any, of course. Portamento control. We have it on velocity. That doesn't matter since we're not going to use portamento at all. Every kind of movement that sounds like the portamento movements in the saxophone, or this gliding between notes, we are going to do with our guitar. At least I am. This is my take on using a guitar as a MIDI controller. So things like that. I'm always using my whammy bar for that. And of course you can, if you don't have a whammy bar or you don't want to bend for those things, you can use portamento, but I find it extremely hard to use in a controlled manner. So I'm always putting portamento max time to no portamento. I guess you could set portamento control to CC as well. So the only time it would be addressing portamento is when you give it a CC message, but the important stuff is no portamento here. This transition velocity sense, we really don't need to address this since we have taken the portamento out of the equation right now. So I won't be going into that one. You can leave it at that setting if you want to. You have node off velocity. You can leave it on if you want to. Attack control is described in the manual as how the attack of the node is controlled. So on the hard velocity, it's controlled strongly by the note on velocity. On the velocity soft, it's controlled weakly by the note on velocity. And in the expression version, it's controlled by the shape of the expression control. We are looking for the tightest possible connection between our instrument and the SWAM instrument. So of course it would be interesting to know what as I chose the breath controller preset now. The breath controller is the main expression controller. There is, I believe, a part of the preset that also acts on note on velocity anyway. I'm going to show you a little picture that comes with the manual here. So this is how we should look at the structure of a note on value in relation to the expression control that comes after it. It can be controlled in different manners, and the attack to sustain relation here is really interesting. It can be short and it can be long. For me, the shorter it is, the better, since I want a hard attack from my picked note and then go into expression control that is controlled by perhaps my breath controller or a pedal or aftertouch data coming in from MIDI Guitar. But I want the attack to sustain time to be as short as possible. And then we have an expression period here, and you have some auto expression related to that. These are settings that we can go into if we want to, and then we have release time that makes for perhaps the dying out of the tone or the note. And this is from the note off time. You have the release time, and I want this one to be as short as possible as well. Shortening this distance and this distance makes for a really tight experience of the relationship between the guitar and the instrument. And these two things are the ones I'm going to show you how to set. Now I'm looking for attack to sustain, to the shortest possible attack to sustain value to begin with. So we have this attack control. I have it as expression, and we have a breath controller mode. I'm using the breath controller, so I want a fast breath controller mode. Breath controller attack sensitivity, I want it as high as possible, this sensitivity. And then we have something called attack expression bias, and you won't find that in the old manual actually. So I brought up in the new manual, sorry. So I brought up the old manual, and the attack to expression bias, it's an algorithmic remapping of attack velocity curve response to expression. Perhaps it doesn't say too much, but it sounds like something that might help us somewhat with faster attack if you want to. Anyway, so we have gone over the MIDI part here on the advanced tab. Okay, so if we want to know what the Portamento max time, since I'm just telling you to turn that off, what does it do to the guitar playing if we leave it on? Listen to this simple hammer on. I think that would be all the argument you need to leave that off. Let's go further into the instrument. Random dynamic. Of course you can use stuff like this, but when you're trying to learn an instrument or actually trying to play an instrument, it's never good to have any random action that you don't know about. You can use it later when you have all the other parameters down and you know exactly what does what. Dynamic pitch, on the other hand, really doesn't matter. You can use it, you can use that. It's a curve, as is the dynamic harmonic, for instance. Release time. Now here's something that I told you I was going to be shortening. So this is one of those things that I think is relevant for this tight experience. You're probably not gonna hear it, but it's actually more tangible when you really play. It only has to do with how much the note's going to bleed into the next note or stuff like this, but it's if your intentions are to play rather fast stuff, keep this short. Attack to sustain, that's the same thing. You want this as short as possible, since it's relating to when the note is going from the note on value to be taken over by the expression control value. So for the breakerish or the Coltrane-ish stuff, keep this as short as possible as well. Auto expression, as with all auto stuff and random stuff, don't use it. Breathy PPP, of course, it's a nice add to an instrument to have this breathiness to it in the lower velocity register. Okay, so this is nothing really that is going to be affecting the actual connection between your instrument and between your guitar and the instrument. It perhaps it affects the experienced connection, but it doesn't affect how it actually reacts. So this is something you can experiment with if you want to. These were all the settings on both the instrument and the MIDI part, of course. We've been into the pitch tab. Now we have a timbre tab, and here you have all the instruments that also are on this first page. You can go between the instruments, settings, different characters of instruments if you want to. These are the same as this is, of course, so you have all those instruments here to go between. So I'm going with the sax 4, that's my standard for some reason, so I'm doing that now as well. Harmonic structure, subharmonics, format, I'm not going to go into these. I use breath noise full on, since I play a lot of solo stuff. I like that. I like those small details. Timbre correction, you can use that to enhance fundamentals or the harmonics. This is something to be working with later on, I guess, for you, but it's here and it's great to have. Play modes, I never address those for my sake, so this chromatic part is related to the Portamento stuff as well, so we can have it off or on, it doesn't matter really. For me, this is more interesting. This is one of those things I would tell you to actually do something about, and it's called attack start. The manual says it progressively cuts the attack for a more immediate attack response. Only by setting this to 0 can the complete original attack be played. So in my interpretation of that, setting the attack to 0, it would make for the whole of the original attack to be played, and going higher up it would lessen the length of the attack, and in my experience also shorten the distance between the guitar and the instrument. So it's setting this to 4 makes for a tighter connection between the guitar and the tenor sax, or in this case the tenor sax, the SWAM instrument. Legato mode. There are two different types of legato that can be selected. Use whatever you feel like. It's nothing special. I use the key noise full on as always. Alternative fingering is for the saxophone. It's nothing I'm going to go over here. Overblow threshold. This is something really interesting in this new version actually. Why? Because it differs in the name from the previous version. It's the difference between the squeak to the overblow. It's the squeak to the overblow ratio from the previous versions of the SWAM instrument. So you had this exact function in the previous versions as well, but there it was called squeak to overblow ratio. Let me give you an example so you know instead. So I'm engaging the overblow now. I'm putting it on. You get the drift. It's more of an initial squeak in the lower part here, and the full overblown effect is on the upper part. So it's you hear that it's ringing all the time, the overblow, whereas in this part it would be only in the initial attack you have this squeak. So that's what that is. Good to know. You also turn off and on the overblow here, of course. Fall down, I'm not going to go into, you know what it is from every other library you have worked with. So let's go into expressivity. Expression, of course, is going to react as I'm using my breath controller or my pedal, or if I'm using, say, my MIDI guitar to after-touch for expression, it would act on any note I'm picking, since it's the same thing from the MIDI Guitar 2 software. Vibrato depth and vibrato rate we're not interested in, since I'm using, I should say I'm not interested in, since I'm using my own vibrato for all these instruments. So these could be at whatever. These are interesting, of course, if you are going to use your mod wheel for vibrato, or if you're going to use the scripted vibrato. That's when you're going to be going here and address these settings. Growl and Flutter, of course, you know what those are. So there we are. These are all the tabs here. Quite a handful, I would guess, for anyone that is new to this, but we also have this that is new to the version 3, and it's a great addition actually to the sound shaping possibilities of these instruments. First off, you have a compressor, nothing strange about it. Then you have an EQ, enable it, and you have classic equalizer stuff. So going over those settings, those preset settings, you can see the changes in here and how it affects the sound overall as well. You have early reflection gain, and these are most prominent in, or most, the effect is most prominent in, perhaps in the horns and the trumpets and those instruments. I would advise you to go and listen to them there. Then you have reverb mix and reverb time. So do we have something more? Yeah, we do actually, and this is also a great addition. And for those that had the previous version of the SWAM instruments and have used MIDI Guitar 2 and seen anything that I've produced, I've always told them to address the expressivity curve and put it to the bottom end of that one. We don't have any such expressivity curves here, but instead we have on the mapping table side the expression. If I click on this one, I have an expression box here, and I can change the message controlling the expression. So if I want my MIDI Guitar 2 aftertouch here to be the main expression controller, if I change this to aftertouch, now I don't need to use my breath controller anymore. So this is reacting to how hard I strike the notes. There's no settings in MIDI Guitar that I can do in relation to the aftertouch here. It's just a simple curve coming out of MIDI Guitar 2 that is sort of a copy of a velocity curve, but it's meant to give us the possibility to use aftertouch as expression data at least. So now we have okay, so now perhaps I don't need this one anymore. I'll get rid of my my breath controller for now. So up here I have the curve, and I can change the curve and how the expression is reacting to the incoming expression data, in this case from the aftertouch. You can see the little indication here. If I'm changing to this kind of curve, it's going to be reacting a bit better. Perhaps not, but it's another kind of reaction. You see, this curve is something like the Lin 0 curve that was on the previous version of the SWAM instrument. So this is probably the best curve to use when you are going to use aftertouch for as expression data. You can even change it like this. So it almost never dies. If you want a really soft, sounds like a smoker to me, so I don't use those too much. I want more of a power. So I would actually use this curve. Perhaps I'm also going to change some of its appearance with these. But I mean, it's a great addition to have this detailed curves to work with in these newer versions, as opposed to perhaps only the expression curves from the previous ones. So going back to mapping here, now you see here that it's aftertouch. If I were to change this to breath controller, I would still have the curve left from the one I changed to, so I would have to do something about that, but let's not. We can look at the other things that you can change here if you want to, and let's do an assignment here instead with something more. This is how easy it is to assign something to any controller you might have. I have the byte part of this sensor set to MIDI CC4. If I click learn here and byte on this one, you should see this value actually is changed to 4 here. And you did. So now I have Growl assigned to biting on this one. It's kind of easy for me to, it's a bit too easy. Of course, I can go into this and make it more or less sensitive. In this case, it's a bit too sensitive, I would say. It doesn't work really. That's better. Now it works more in a way that I can use as an instrument effect, and it's not either on or off. It's more of a something that I can actually control while biting on it. I'll unassign this so we don't have to think about that anymore. But you have these different, you have this box, you have the MIDI part here that is either the presets or the MIDI mapping table. You also have some touch and assign stuff, but I'm not going into that either. Then you have this part, that's the main menu, and you have save and load, for instance. That's if you're to save a preset, you go in here and you click save and load, and you get to this part here. You have now the default tenor sax part. If I could change the name, and then I click on this one, and I would save it to user preset. You see I have 2 here already. The thing to think about when you're saving presets, I'm using, say, external controller mappings. I'm including those since I'm using breath controller pretty often. So when I save a preset, I'm saving it with the instruction to use my breath controller as well, or my pedal or something like that. Otherwise, you're just saving the sound presets or the things related to how it sounds. Going back to that menu, you have reset, and you have controller mappings, export, import, parameter lock. And you also have some stuff like options, window size, for instance. That's how I can get the window to be full size, my screen, so even I can see account license and about. This is the main part of this one, and it's quite a lot to be working with, so I'm going to be putting up something of a list in the description to this video on the most important parts to address. The first thing you will have to do is, of course, address the expression control. And that's choosing from these presets, any of these presets. You can actually choose a Seaboard preset, for instance. I did that now, but what I did now then is to change also stuff like pitch too. So we're going to have to change those if you are using this preset. So I'm setting those to 2 again, as we want to have it. Otherwise, this is nothing. If we go into the MIDI part here, you see that the MIDI profile would be MPE on the Seaboard preset. This is something we have to address. We want legacy. This is not an MPE controller yet. Portamento control in this preset is more interesting since it's no Portamento used. Since the Seaboard preset actually has the same possibilities to bend notes in quite a similar manner to how the guitar works. So it's not using the Portamento either. Note off velocity is on. I want it to be on expression or on the velocity hard. That depends a bit on how it's going to react to me playing. That wouldn't be any difference that makes a difference. So attack control, sure, I'll leave it on expression since I always use that. Breath control I don't need to address here. Attack to expression bias, then it's off for this, so I guess they're not using that algorithm that I was talking about earlier, at least for the Seaboard preset. So we think you hear that it's kind of weak again, the note. And the thing we need to do about that is to go into the MIDI part, the mapping table. Now we see that we have expression after touch. If we go into the curve here, remember that we chose this curve for the little better. You get a longer sustain and a little better So the thing you obviously need to address is this curve, this expression curve once again, and that's to be expected. It's the same thing as with the instruments, the version 2 instruments, where one of those most important things to address was the expression curve. The difference here is that we addressed that in the mapping table expression curve here. So do with it what you want to, but I mean there are a lot more possibilities nowadays as in comparison to the previous version. It sounds better, it's tighter, it's far more playable. I'm going to leave you with this since it's already far too much information to actually do something great with. I hope you can get something out of this. See you later for some more stuff. Bye.